You're really into these slimy, sluggish, mollusk kind of things lately. It's a theme.
Yeah, I guess the theme is mollusk.
All right, everyone, we are back. Welcome to the Chemist Confessions Podcast. I am Victoria.
And I'm Gloria.
And this is a human conversation on all the skincare science we talk about on the daily. And today we are moving away from sunscreens. We need a breather. And we are finally touching on vitamin C derivatives because we have received so many questions about non-ascorbic acid vitamin C. And so we're going to just try to tackle them one derivative at a time.
Yeah, I think before, admittedly, it's not necessarily our favorite topic. And before we try to lump all the derivatives into one derivative episode, and it ended up being like, honestly,
way too long. Way too long.
Yeah, it's a little sloppy all over the place. Ultimately, I felt like what we've done before isn't super helpful. So we pulled you guys on some of your top derivative products that you're curious about. And two really jumped out to us this year, which is the ethylated ascorbic acid or 3-ethyl ascorbic acid, and then THC ascorbate. So we're going to tackle the ethyl ascorbic acid first. It's going to be
that huge intake, that breath that you took, Gloria, I think sums it up very nicely.
You know, I'm always pleasantly surprised by our listeners' tolerance for morbid episodes. The ones where we are like really reaching for positivity. And people are like, that was fun. And I appreciate it. And I'm just going to say y'all need that positivity for this one again.
So slight reveal, but there's still quite a bit to digest, so we should get right into it. But first things first, not everyone is fully aware of the vitamin C derivative space, so how about a little review?
Yep, so vitamin C is, when we talk about vitamin C, we are usually referring to the ascorbic acid form of it. That's the OG, that's well tested, and it's well tested for all the benefits that you typically think of with vitamin C, like being antioxidants that can prevent photo aging. It is the molecule that's actually clinically tested for all the benefits that you associate with vitamin C's in general, such as being a great antioxidant to prevent photo aging. It can boost collagen production, and it's also a great skin brightener. So it's an essential piece to a lot of people's hyperpigmentation routines. But the reason why the industry has sometimes turned to derivatives is because it is super unstable.
We highly recommend you guys to revisit episode 139 and 140, where we actually get into the stability quirks of ascorbic acid. But long story short, after we did these episodes, there was definitely a few that were like, this is why I've turned to other vitamin C stuff. So what we should say is, in terms of how they stabilize ascorbic acid, a lot of times they just add a few tails to it, just manipulate the molecule a smidge just to, again, help stability. But when you do this, usually you need to validate it in the same capacity, do some comparative studies to show that it is indeed just as effective. We can guarantee you, just because you add a new flashy, shiny tail on a molecule does not mean it'll actually work, does not mean that it'll be more stable. Also, you need to revalidate what is the precise concentration to achieve the benefit. So it's not a very simple, just like one-to-one translation, which is why Gloria and I have a lot of pain when we delve into this arena, because that means dissecting each molecule, looking into the historical testing, and honestly, what is the work done behind actually validating, these derivatives. So a lot of times we like to refer people to a table that we've actually shared in the past, and we'll put it up on the screen. This is a really nice review paper that just kind of summarizes some of the main vitamin C derivatives you will find out there and the general status quo of the testing or understanding behind some of these derivatives.
Yeah, so we'll put the table on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. Definitely pause, scan through it. It's a very popular table that you might have seen on the socialverse. And to summarize, basically all of them has a slightly different stability profile. All of them are stable at different pHs. They can, not all of them have been tested for the same skin benefits. Not all of them work. Some converts to ascorbic acid, some don't. It's all a big mixed bag. And if you need like further convincing that each molecule should be evaluated and taken by its own merit. They shouldn't get a free class pass just because they're chemically, structurally cousins with ascorbic acid. Just take a look at the retinoids family. You wouldn't use retinol at the same concentration as you would tretinoin because, again, how it works with skin once it's been a little bit rejigged is different, and all these things need further clinicals to validate. So anyway, that's a really quick background of why the industry has a bunch of vitamin C derivatives. We pulled you guys on which ones you want us to talk about, and the most popular one is THC ascorbate, so of course I'm going to shelve it for the second part of the vitamin C derivative train, and the second one is 3-O-ethyl. There's a lot of others out there.
I'm just going to cut you off, Gloria. I just want to say, Gloria took the lead on this episode. And originally, the plan was to do both 3-O-ethyl ascorbic acid and THC. And then I think like midway through her research, she comes over to me and she's like, basically like, hear me out. This episode is only going to be on 3-O-ethyl. There's enough to talk about. And you can see she's just like so deep into the research rabbit hole. She's like, I can only take one. Like, we're only doing one.
That is the true story as to why we're doing it first and only doing one. But yeah, thank you guys for all your questions and comments. And I think it's actually great that these two kind of jumped out because these are also the hardest two to shop for because there are actually quite a few product options as well.
Yes, yeah.
So we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to look at actual clinical data on 3-O-ethyl and answer the question if ethylated ascorbic acid should be on your radar. All right, summer is officially upon us, and the best secret weapon to keeping your skin smooth, clear, and hydrated is actually chemical exfoliants. That's right, a solid AHA peel mask like our gold standard with 30% glycolic acid and 5% tranexamic acid just once a week can keep dull, rough skin texture at bay.
Do you have sensitive skin, or are you wary of high levels of glycolic acid? Well, not to worry. You should consider our Baby Steps exfoliator with 30% PHA gluconolactone and 14% gentle AHA lactic acid. This is the alternative for those who struggle with glycolic acid. And if that still sounds high, not to worry, because we tested this in our Chemist Crew incubator with sensitive skin types, and they approved of the levels. For podcast listeners, if you are curious to try, please use code CCPodcast2025 for 15% off your first purchase.
All right, guys, we're back. And I just have to put this out there before we dive into the actual meat is we got a comment on one of the older episodes we did last year on whether or not adapalene is good for anti-aging. And at that time, we took kind of like a soft stance on it. Like, we think a retinol is still better tested. Adapalene has
more
promise,
well understood.
But the data exactly was a little lacking. And we got a comment that's like, hey, I see derms that promote adapalene with adapalene for aging, which is fine because like in that episode, we also talked about a lot of data looks at adapalene at the prescription level for anti-aging. And then they hit me with, also ChatGPT told me that adapalene is great for anti-aging. So why are you guys so negative? I'm not mad at that person. A lot of people search things. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, are we in, I guess like, I was going to say like, are we in competition with ChatGPT now?
Yes, we are. And I will say, I will be honest, I'm like, I guess it is about time that people ask us why we disagree with ChatGPT. So, you know what? This is perfect. This is a perfect time to showcase that, like, honestly, AI is great for a lot of things. But just like you shouldn't trust everything you find on the interwebs, you shouldn't trust everything a robot tells you that just kind of summarizes the interwebs, whether the good parts and the bad parts. So I asked ChatGPT, I was like, hey, ChatGPT, how does ethyl ascorbic acid compare to ascorbic acid? Is it better than? Is it worse than? Whatever. And they spit me out a very, very long, like, well-rounded response to my question. And it even gave me a cute little chart that graded it on antioxidant, collagen boosting abilities, brightening, clinical data, and a summary table with check marks and X's to really help you visualize whether or not it's good. And if you look at the summary table with the check marks, you're going to be like, wow, 3-O-ethyl is a no-brainer. I'm going to jump right on this train. It only loses to ascorbic acid in potency, which got 3 check marks from ChatGPT, whereas ethyl ascorbic acid got 2 check marks. But ascorbic acid got a fat X for stability, and they got 3 check marks for stability. And you guys get the point. Basically, other than clinical track record and potency, which it only slightly loses out to ascorbic acid for, it just feels like ascorbic acid is destined for a trash can based on, AI results.
Question.
Yes. Go ahead, Victoria.
So I think dialing it back to the first chart, first of all, the fact that they add an emoji sparkly icon to their efficacy title is kind of, yeah. I don't know how to feel about that. Secondly, even in the brightening anti-pigmentation part, they actually say in vivo skin lightening shown for 3-O-ethyl, but you and I have been down this rabbit hole many a times. We are also aware of the industry, like the back end side of testing. And that, I also am like, where did they get that? Like from what are they considering as in vivo?
I'm so glad you asked that. So I also asked them that. I was like, hey, that's great that it's got in vivo data. Can you show me the paper? And it was thinking for a little bit. And then it was like, you might want to contact the manufacturers of 3-O-ethyl ascorbic acid for more clinical evidence. Yes, I will show the transcript on YouTube. But basically, just know that ChatGPT makes all their responses seem pretty legit. Now it has like sources marked on the bottom if you ask them a question like this. But if you go into the sources, a lot of times it kind of lies to you about the summaries.
Some of those references are broken, guys. And I think the other thing too is like just looking at the second summary table of like penetration and like clinical track record. Like what's the difference of, so if that's the clinical track record of 3-O-ethyl at 2 check marks, I am scared to know like what is the 1 check mark look like. Yeah, I think this is it's kind of scary.
Yeah, so all I have to say, if you ask ChatGPT any level of skincare questions, just know to take their responses with a grain of salt, and it's just like a first pass, if you will. And anyway, I just want to put that out there, but we'll get into the actual data that we two humans actually read. So
let's do it. Okay.
First things first, which is basically the main benefit that derivatives always tout, which is stability. And there was one paper that actually characterized the 2 molecules side by side. So we have that direct comparative data, which is awesome. Okay, so let's take a look at stability data. And in this paper, they actually look at quite a few more parameters, but they did a great job breaking down the stability. I'll just put the charts. I'll just put the charts on the screen. Not gonna go into technical details on what the measurement means, but just know that it's a basic absorption peak to gauge just about how much molecule is left. And it is very, very obvious that to the left side of the screen, we're looking at ascorbic acid, whereas to the right side of the screen, you're looking at 3-O-ethyl. Yeah, they actually repeated the measurement across a couple different temperatures and time points. They took the measurements at 25C, 35, 45, and also at 55. And you can see the 3-O-ethyl cluster remained pretty tight across all temperatures and time points, which is great. But I just want to point out that if you look at the time scale, it's 10,000 minutes, which to me is such a weird way to denote the x-axis. But that's about a week, just for those of you who's too tired to do the math.
Yeah. Based on this, the comparison is pretty striking. For those of you who might see this and feel like, oh my gosh, degradation in 1 week time frame, that sounds very alarming for ascorbic acid. Just know like these are not the traditional tests that are done to monitor ascorbic acid degradation. And in terms of process to measure the absorbance of these two can totally have an effect. If anything, this is simply a comparison of the two rather than that your ascorbic acid degradation is going to be that terrible just within 7 days. And again, we touch on ascorbic acid degradation in previous episodes, so definitely take a look there for a more accurate idea.
And then I found a second study that looked at 3-O-ethyl across a couple different common solvents. You'll hear that 3-O-ethyl, because it has a teeny little tail, that it adds a little bit to the oil solubility. But really at its core, it's still more of a water-based product. And I love the study that actually just looked at how it behaves in a lot of single solvents. And I think this is a really good study to look at how in-depth you can get, and on some level, how in-depth you should get with new active ingredients like 3-O-ethyl. So they took 2% 3-O-ethyl and put it across a lot of different solvents. You have things like isopropyl myristate, isopropyl alcohol, propylene glycol, glycerin, ethoxydiglycol, just a list of some of the common solvents that you might find in skincare in general. And they took across the stability across 5 days. Again, very jazzy.
Yeah, and I just want to add, like, typical stability outlooks will span months, not days. Like, that is not by our cosmetic standards normal. So again, only to emphasize, this is like how early on in terms of the characterization work that is done, that the data is really mapping it over like a week's worth of time.
We'll put the result chart on the screen really quickly so you guys can take a look. The main takeaway here, I don't want anyone to zoom in and go, the purple line is which solvent? The point here isn't to say that, okay, you should look for these solvents in, or you should avoid certain solvents in your 3-O-ethyl product. It's to show that even though a lot of times these derivatives are positioned as stable, you'll see that the formula as a whole, something as simple as the main solvent that's in, can have an impact on stability. The worst one by the end of 5 days looks like it's at about 20% degradation, which is pretty significant over just a little bit under a week. So all this to say is, while it is more stable than ascorbic acid, it's not like a gimme. It's not like you buy a 3-O-ethyl and you're like, oh, this is going to be perfectly stable for the entire shelf life of the product. You can put it in anything. Right. Okay, so that's stability. Let's dive into, you guys are probably like, okay, that's fine, whatever. It's more stable than ascorbic acid, good enough for me. Let's launch into whether or not it actually works, which is probably your real question here. So to start, vitamin C is used as an antioxidant, so we have to look at the antioxidant potential of this ingredient.
With antioxidants, let's start off with a relatively simple study. The study was an ex vivo model on porcine skin, and ultimately they're going to be testing 10% 3-O-ethyl ascorbic acid in essentially two specific types of gel. So they create a simple hydrogel versus what they're calling a bi-gel, which is a blend of a hydrogel and long story short, another type of gel that allows them to incorporate a little bit more oil and also contains a smidge of tocopherol. And what they do is they will stain the skin with a blue dye, methylene blue, and then apply the solution on the skin. And ultimately, to show in a more visual way the antioxidant capacity, it will essentially absorb the dye. And so we'll put the results on the screens for our YouTube viewers to see, but ultimately it shows that when you use these hydrogels or these different types of gels, it's much more effective and has a higher antioxidant capacity compared to simply just using a water solution of 3-O-ethyl ascorbic acid. So honestly, it's a really great visual, and I think it also just shows that formulation matters, right? You can't just sprinkle in this vitamin C derivative into water and can say that that's like the most efficacious way, So yeah,
and of course you guys might be wondering if that sounds great. It sounds like ethyl ascorbic acid works as an antioxidant, but how does it compare to ascorbic acid? And luckily for us, they did do that study. There's a study that compared 3-O-ethyl ascorbic acid directly against ascorbic acid in what we call DPPH assay, which is just a very standard antioxidant capacity in vitro study. And we'll put the charts up. And the y-axis is what they call the IC50 value, which is basically what concentration of active ingredient is needed to quench half the free radicals that's present. And the results is kind of surprising.
Yeah.
The white bars you see on the screen is 3-O-ethyl, and the slightly grayed out bars next to it is ascorbic acid. And basically because if you think about it, it's the amount of active you need to quench half. So smaller the value, the more efficient. In terms of efficiency and how much active you need, then that makes it a little better in this particular study. What's really funky to me for this assay is that ascorbic acid is pretty consistent across all the different temperatures. They did this at 25, 35, 45, and 55, but ascorbic acid does degrade relatively rapidly at 55, so they're still seeing that even though some of the molecules may be undergoing degradation, it's still a pretty efficient antioxidant. Whereas 3-O-ethyl lags behind ascorbic acid the entire time.
I think the only thing I would want to know more about is that, when they do the sort of DPPH study, they incubate these samples for just 10 minutes at this temperature. So it's a very initial reading. And I don't know if it's possible because I'm not completely familiar with the study, but ultimately what would be a really nice piece of data to follow would be ascorbic acid, maybe incubated at a higher temperature, and then for a longer period of time, and then doing the study. Don't know how that works, but I also am quite surprised that 3-O-ethyls with the temperature, it's a very clear descent in terms of the quenching activity, but with ascorbic acid, it doesn't matter what temperature. Essentially, it's all pretty similar.
The study is kind of funky as a whole, and I'm actually really glad you mentioned the time point thing, because a lot of times you'll see people also make claims that even though ascorbic acid is faster acting and seems like a stronger antioxidant all around, they will claim that 3-O-ethyl has better efficacy in a more sustained way. I didn't really pull those data included in this podcast because ascorbic acid in final formula also has a lot of studies done on basically how long that antioxidant capacity lasts on skin even just after one single application. Whereas we don't have that for 3-O-ethyl. So for me, it's that's one of those funky claims that's associated with 3-O-ethyl that I don't really want to go into too deep because in real life application, I don't think it holds up.
Yep.
Yeah,
I agree.
And just to double check, just to corroborate that one study, there is another study that was actually published in the Society of Cosmetic Chemists journal that looked at 3-O-ethyl's performance in DPPH again. And instead of being presented as the IC50, it's just the scavenging activity that's presented here. And confirmed that it is weaker than ascorbic acid. In the ascorbic acid was able to quench about 82.91% of the free radicals, whereas 3-O-ethyl quenched about 55.52. Yes, it's an antioxidant. No, it is not better than the ascorbic acid. I should mention that DPPH is just one assay. There is a gazillion ways to measure antioxidant capacity. If I sit here and looked at every single assay that 3-O-ethyl has been through, it would take forever. Nor are the data very DPPH was that baseline comparison that I was able to get data for. So yeah, that's the general takeaway there in the antioxidant category.
I also am going to say, that's where it ends. It doesn't make it past in vitro, or in tubo. It doesn't make it past this measurement at all. So I think comparison data, great. Actually better than some of the other, even more exotic derivatives out there. But in terms of, its timeline and amount of testing in the antioxidant space versus ascorbic acid, just so much more work needed.
Yeah, 100%. So that's antioxidant. Last but not least is some of the more visual skin benefits that you will use vitamin C for. So things like brightening and anti-aging, collagen boosting. And you guys might be like, this is it. This is where they're going to show us some human clinical data. You are wrong because that doesn't exist. So we're going to look at some more in vitro data. So I should mention that there's also quite a few ways in vitro to assess whether or not an ingredient is going to be good for skin brightening. One of the most basic studies that you'll hear is referenced here and there on hyperpigmentation episodes is tyrosinase. Tyrosinase basically is an enzyme that determines the rate at which your pigment is produced. So by slowing that down, telling take a chill pill is one of the main pathways of hyperpigmentation ingredients. It's also very common to measure tyrosinase inhibition rate to kind of early on assess an ingredient for hyperpigmentation. So unfortunately, I couldn't find the data done for ascorbic acid directly, but I found a blip here actually comparing 3-O-ethyl to kojic acid, which is another ingredient that's very well known for hyperpigmentation. And hyperpigmentation, this is going to be another IC50. So basically the amount of this active ingredient that's needed to slow down or inhibit half of the tyrosinase activity. The IC50 value for kojic acid is 0.04 grams per liter. Remember that, 0.04. For 3-O-ethyl, it's 7.5 grams per liter.
Wowzers.
That's
not great. That's over 12 12x.
100?
Oh no. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. Sorry. Yes, that's like over 100x.
Yeah, so as a quick recap, kojic acid is tested topically at around a 2% use level. Now, these types of studies, they impact your final use level. It can be used to kind of gauge how much product you need. They're not the end all be all. Not saying that 100x here is 100x topically, but it's not a great look, is what we're saying.
Yeah, and I think usually tyrosinase is, like Laura mentioned, it really is like the first step into trying to see if there's any opportunity in brightening. And I think the only thing to consider is not every brightening ingredient is a tyrosinase inhibitor. So that's not to say that it can't help in other parts of the hyperpigmentation or pathway. But if you do see a claim that does use this specific lingo, you might want to raise an eyebrow to that unless they have a clinical to follow. So that's very fascinating.
Yep, and Victoria's absolutely right. Tyrosinase is just one facet of it. And I should mention that, to be fair to 3-O-ethyl, there is quite a few different in vitro studies that looked at this ingredient for all these various indicators to show that it can brighten your skin or treat hyperpigmentation. One of the more interesting ones I found looked at what they call C-shot serum. So it has 30% 3-O-ethyl and...
Oh, sorry. I said, wowzers, that's a lot of 3-O-ethyl.
Yeah, just a wee little 30% serum plus 1% lactic acid. And they actually sent it through a bunch of different tests that we're not going to go through all the data. But the one I want to share that is tested directly on melanocyte or your cells that directly produce the melanin. They tested on an in vitro cell culture of a melanocyte to measure the melanin content. And I'm just gonna put the results on the screen. The control is without the serum, and the test bar has a serum. The data is significant.
Well, I was gonna mention the collagen levels. It goes from, well, the control is at basically 0, and then it moves up 1 microgram, and then a double that amount will move it up to 1.2 micrograms per milliliter. Again, it's in vitro, so everything's relative. But yeah, I think it's just like, it's so hard for us to talk about this when this is the data we have to work with. I do have one question. Did they mention why there's 1% lactic acid?
No.
Okay. I'm just so curious. Yeah. The hydrating benefits. I just find it 30% with 1% lactic acid is such an interesting combination to me.
Yes. What an interesting formula to put together.
Anyways, and that's the end of anti-aging benefits for 3-O-ethyl is in vitro data.
Yeah, if any of y'all have a study that is actually really well done, really sexy, that you think we missed, please send our way.
Give
I'm
us
happy
a
to
sign.
film. Yeah, I'm happy to film a correction, but ChatGPT couldn't give me a better paper, and this is where we're at. A lot of in vitro data. And for those of you listening, the melanin content decreased from an average of around 20 micrograms per milliliter down to what looks like about 17. 17. So the difference goes from 19 to 17. So it does something, but it doesn't seem to be anything super wow worthy. This is the state of it. I wish I have a really cool clinical to show you guys, but there isn't. And to sum everything up,
yes, you should summarize.
The first thing is 3-O-ethyl ascorbic acid is definitely more stable than standard ascorbic acid. But I should mention that the long-term stability data is actually a little bit sparse. Most of the more robust studies look at it within a 1-week time frame, which is quite short compared to the standard stability test. And it is formula dependent. So while it is more stable, definitely don't treat it like a gimme. I mean, I don't think any of you guys are doing it, but don't bake it in your car. Don't leave it sitting on your shelf for 2 years and expect the same level of potency. So there's that. Ascorbic acid is the better antioxidant. Again, there's data that suggests that even though ethyl ascorbic acid is not as powerful on the onset, it has longer lasting effects. But that aspect is actually validated in ascorbic acid topically, so I can't really put much weight behind that. And then lastly, the brightening and collagen boosting data, there's some, but it's all in the in vitro stage. So that is where we're at. And we're going to take a big break now. And when we come back, we're going to talk about who it's for. And if you're shopping for this ingredient, what's some things you should keep in mind.
All right, it's the Animal Fun Fact Corner.
It's my turn
Gloria.
again.
Oh,
Right, you
Lord.
guys?
Oh, Lord.
I didn't look for any sea stars this time. I decided that since I scarred off you guys last week, I'm going to go wholesome this week. And of course, I am talking about the tradition of snail racing.
You're really into these slimy, sluggish, mollusk kind of things lately. It's a theme.
Yeah, I guess the theme is mollusks. But I am bringing it up because it is actually coming up very soon. It is the World Snail Racing event is happening in July 19th.
That's
on July
so
19th in Canham, England. I didn't know
in
where this
England
was.
again. Man,
Yes.
those guys are animal fanatics. That's awesome.
Yep. And I had to look it up because I'm like, where is Canham, England? It's about 2.5 hours drive north of London. Let's just say I had to zoom out a few times on Google Maps to find the nearest city that I recognize. So,
Oh my gosh.
and apparently it's been going on for 50 plus years.
Wow.
I guess it's their version of like a local state fair, and they just do this competition to kick off, I guess, to celebrate summer. And
I
it
love
is
that.
exactly as it sounds, is a bunch of snails placed on a table that's wetted because that's how they like it. And there's target marks. There's like different rings. And the first snail that reaches the outer edge of the table, there's a ring that's made from just like a wet rope, basically.
Yeah.
The first snail to get there wins, and it's super cute. And I'm gonna just read their racing background for everyone real quick. It says, the snail master, that's all caps, is very formal. The snail master starts the races. They shout, ready, steady, slow, and off dash the snails. The snail master keeps the course well watered as snail likes damp conditions. Races are held on a table covered with a white cloth, and they will machine a circle with braid in the middle and then machine a similar circle 13 inches away. Owners can dress up. I will
Dress
say,
up like formal wear or like costume wear? Like,
you know, I will say I saw that line and got really excited, and I looked on YouTube for some of their older events. They didn't take the dress up assignment very seriously.
okay. Thought that'd be very cute.
Clearly very optional.
Mhm.
And I love this, which it says the world record stands at 2 minutes over 13 inches. It was set in 1995 by a snail called Archie. The record can be challenged at the World Championships at Canham. Giant foreign snails are not permitted. Often owners like to give their snail names like Speedy or Zoomer.
Cute. When they say
Yeah,
giant
it's-
foreign snails, it reminds me of that parasite, the asshole snail that we talked about.
Oh yeah, the one that's like the size of our faces.
Yeah, that like eats other snails. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's what they
those are
mean.
the one they're talking about. And I found, for those of you curious, definitely check out their videos on
That's so
YouTube. It's
cute.
super wholesome, really
Yeah.
cute. One of the lines in a video that the Snail Master made me chuckle. Is they're saying cheating often comes in the form of snails will try to hitch rides on other snails' backs. And when that happens, the Snail Master will pluck it off and start it back in the middle. No cheating.
Aw. But it's
And-
work smarter, not harder.
Yep. And it's really funny because I saw the record is 2 minutes set by Archie. And on their website, they list out all the winning snails from past years.
Cute.
And it's all over the place. It ranges from 2 minutes and change, getting close to Archie level. And last year, the winning snail took 7 minutes to cross the finishing line. So that year, all the snails are like, nah, bro, I am good here.
Yeah. There's a photo on the website I am browsing, but it looks like a father-daughter duo, and the girl
Mhm.
has like a cup with lettuce, and the snail is like on the lettuce in her winning photo, and I just think that's so cute.
Yeah,
That's
it's super
awesome.
wholesome. So
I
if
love it.
any of you are in London mid-July, consider checking out the World Snail Race.
Okay, Gloria, I gotta ask.
Mm.
We've touched on a lot of like animal events happening in Europe and honestly a lot in the UK. Of the ones, which one would you like to attend? We had like the tarantula pageant. We had like
No, I'm gonna say no to that one right now.
there's like the
Pigeon
farm
calling.
seagull calling.
The seagull. Yeah.
There's the beauty pageants, the farm animal beauty
animal
pageants,
show, the farm
where they wear the
animal.
lab coats, and now we have snail racing. What do you think?
I'm gonna have to try my luck at seagull calling.
That
I think
I think I would need a few drinks though. I don't know if that one I can go in completely sober.
I feel like you have to be a little bit like in a weird place in life to go to that sober. Can you imagine sitting there stone cold sober listening to people?
Yeah, I'm ready to judge some seagull calling. Okay, anyways. Yeah, I think that's a good one. Yeah, okay.
Snail racing. Yay. I hope I redeem myself from the sea star.
Fine, this is acceptable. I appreciate this slimy creature story this time.
Yep.
All right, so we're going to wrap this up, and we're going to simply talk about who 3-O-ethyl ascorbic acid would be for. And I think when Gloria and I were talking about this, the general sentiment is 3-O-ethyl is promising, you know, like
it's one that has a little bit of jazz hands, like efficacy and results.
Yeah, but it really lacks, right? Like in a way, and hopefully you guys can feel that after, you know, all of the data that we've shared with you. And when we were talking about this question of who it's for, I can't help but be like, there are other derivatives out there I'd like to suggest first before 3-O-ethyl. Obviously, people who venture outside of ascorbic acid, a lot of times it is because, you know, they have sensitivity. Some people, it does cause them to break out. And so if you venture in this realm, we probably would recommend you looking into the ascorbyl phosphates first, although there are not as many products out there in that realm, and they are actually not the most stable themselves. More stable than ascorbic acid, but also maybe in some ways not that stable either. So if you are planning to venture out of ascorbic acid, we'd like to suggest you to look there first. But if you venture into 3-O-ethyl, I think the general sentiment is you probably don't want to reach for the strongest concentration first. I think if you've ever heard Gloria talk about her experience with 3-O-ethyl, just because it's more stable, just because, you know, it may seem like it's better overall, it still actually can be quite sensitizing, and especially at some of the much higher levels. In fact, Gloria actually did the due diligence and looked at some of the safety data around 3-O-ethyl, and there's not a lot, but the problem with 3-O-ethyl is that the concentration is just not defined, and that's probably the hardest part for us. Is we don't have a fine-tuned active concentration to recommend you to start with. And what you can find out there is very wide. Anything from, you know, 1% to, as you can see, 30%. So that's our general pain point there.
Yeah, this is usually the part of the episode when we're like, oh, start at this percentage, work your way up to this. This was so hard for us to do a takeaway. I'm not someone that finds ascorbic acid to be sensitizing, but when I worked with 3-O-ethyl, I actually have like, it's not full on sensitivity or irritation, but like to me, it makes my skin like sometimes mildly itchy if I go above like even as low as 5%. But of course, if you look at the efficacy data, being a slightly less efficient antioxidant and less, not as efficient of a tyrosinase inhibitor even, you will feel like, oh, then I need more to ensure efficacy. But honestly, before you think about efficacy, the goal is to not irritate skin. And I was actually kind of curious why sometimes people will claim 3-O-ethyl as the more gentle option or good for sensitive skin. And a lot of it goes back to its cytotoxicity data, which is if you have a petri dish of skin cells and you put some concentration of an ingredient in, do the cells stay alive, or does that concentration kill the cells? That's all that means. And I'll put the cytotoxicity results on the screen here for everyone to take a quick look at. The percentage of cells survive is the y-axis here. And you will see that across different concentrations, it seems like cells survive better in the presence of 3-O-ethyl compared to ascorbic acid. These type of data is often used to say, hey, it's more gentle on your skin cells. Your skin cells survive better, therefore it has to be more gentle. I should mention that these type of studies aren't necessarily, it's not super directly correlated with skin irritation potential. These are fibroblasts in a petri dish is way more exposed than, say, your strand which is made from dead skin cells. And skin irritation is more complex than cytotoxicity. It's just cytotox is used as a gauge. That's it. There's nothing less, nothing more. And if you look at it at 10%, that percentage starts converging on each other. So
I think that's
what does
key.
that really mean?
I was going to say, I think that's key is like, well, yes, at lower concentrations, it really, you see quite a difference between 3-O-ethyl and ascorbic acid. But once you start getting into actual concentrations that are probably going to be more towards what you want to aim for, it seems like that's when things start to level out and they're about similar. So I think that is something that really should be noted as well. Yeah.
Yep. I also looked at any sort of patch testing data that's available for 3-O-ethyl ascorbic acid. There's not a lot, but there's still enough for some key takeaways. There are a few cases of reported sensitivity and irritation by 3-O-ethyl products. There's been about a handful. When I say a handful, literally a handful, there's like 4 cases that's like no validated this person is allergic to 3-O-ethyl, which seems like, for as prominent as this ingredient is, seems like a pretty good track record. It is an ingredient that should be high on your list in terms of like, this is definitely an irritant. But in the summary paper, the highest level that's been patch tested is 10%. Most of the common concentrations that's patch tested across different mediums and formula types is 5% and under. So again, like Victoria was saying, there's a lot of products out there that's easily goes into the 15, 20, 25%. All that to say, if you want to try 3-O-ethyl because you have sensitive skin, please patch test first. Just because it can be more vanilla, the pH of the product should be closer to your skin pH than, say ascorbic acid. All those are great, but still patch test.
I was also thinking about like, any sort of shopping tips. And this is a sneak peek into next episode where we actually discuss 5 3-O-ethyl products. But the other problem to shopping for 3-O-ethyl is that a lot of times they're blended in a very strange way. And I think that part kind of just throws a wrench into some of our shopping guidelines, because ultimately, why are you shopping for 3-O-ethyl? It's so you can get vitamin C in a different way than ascorbic acid. Maybe you don't want to worry as much about like color change or whatever, So, ultimately to say, we will get into the details more in the next episode, but that is something to keep in mind when you are shopping. Is this does take a little bit of a decode, because you will find that a lot of them actually throw a lot of actives into their 3-O-ethyl products.
Yep, and this basically concludes this episode. I just want to end on this pretty funny comment that we got in the in the poll asking you guys which vitamin C derivative you guys liked. And someone voted for sodium ascorbyl phosphate because they said, and I quote, because there's this tiny study saying it might help with acne. You're right, it was a tiny study and it really wasn't any firm conclusions, but as you can see, sometimes it's still better. One tiny study is better than 0 tiny studies.
Awesome. Well, we hope that was helpful for you guys, and at least, giving you some insights into this molecule, which is actually very popular right now. We've noticed there's quite a few launches around this one. But yeah, definitely stay tuned for the next episode where we get to talk about products. But otherwise, we will see you guys next time. Bye.